Hi there. My name is Eleanor Saitta, and I've been working on the Briar and Bramble projects for a few years now with Michael Rogers and the rest of the team. My contribution's been a bit more on and off, but I've helped do a lot of the work around some of the core thinking that's informed especially the split between Briar and Bramble. And a lot of that's what I'm here to talk about to you today. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it in person. I'm very sad. I hope you're all having a lovely conference. Decentralization is fundamentally about autonomy, and that's been the core idea behind Briar from the very start. As long as you're dependent on central infrastructure, your ability to do political organizing and meaningful work around economic justice and a lot of other issues can be severely limited because your basic communication tools and communication structures can always simply be turned off. So for us, one of the very critical things that we had to be delivering a system that fundamentally provided for individual and community autonomy. Privacy is a necessary structure for democracy. There's an excellent essay from a few years back by Moxie Marlinspike where he talks about the role of privacy and specifically the role of anonymity, not just basic privacy, in providing room for democratic expression and room for legal change. In order to organize for political change, at some point you will probably do things which may be against the current law, even if everyone in society, either at the time or very shortly thereafter, agrees that what you did was for the good of society as a whole. Especially as we start to see corporate actions and companies reaching in and attempting to punish individuals and communities for the work that they do around organizing for basic rights, this becomes more and more important. Now, when we talk about privacy, we have to speak about metadata privacy too. Just having content privacy isn't actually very useful. The content of your communication and who you're communicating to, the content of your communication can often be derived from who you're communicating to, when, and what your patterns of communication are. So this is why with Briar, we took a fairly aggressive approach to saying that all of our comms are either over Tor or over direct local transport, whether that's USB stick or SD card at a distance or local radios. And a lot of the design decisions as we've built out the interface and as we've thought about how this system works are based around that idea that we need not only strong confidentiality and integrity of messages, but that we also need full metadata unlinkability so that third parties can't link communications together easily. The internet was designed around individuals. This is fundamental in the way that the internet has been conceived of as a structure for a very long time, right? The basic element of internet design is the user. Originally, there was the idea of, well, you'd have your local sysadmin, right? You'd have your site, right? There'd be somebody running the internet. And a lot of the people who were part of that original set of decisions around creating what the internet was are the people who still think of themselves today as the internet community. However, practically the governance of the internet now looks much more like a small number of corporations wielding a vast amount of power over entire structures of users, billions of users. And in the thing that we've built, there isn't a role between the entire internet or the entire structure that an ISP or a provider like Facebook interacts with and individuals. There's nothing in the middle. There's no room for community. Sure, you get different people trying to build out very limited structures like Facebook groups or whatever, mailing lists, that kind of thing. But these are fundamentally hacks, right? They're not built into the architecture of the system, and they're not actually thought through. There isn't a coherent structure that places as much importance on the community as it does on the individual. So this was one of the things that we really wanted to look at in Briar, was to think about how we structured tools for communities. Now, obviously, because we're looking at individual nodes, individual people's devices connecting to other people's devices, there are limits to how much we can build this out directly, but a lot of our thinking has revolved around those structures and figuring out how we can enable them. Autonomy and privacy are fundamentally community ideas, right? You are not autonomous on your own because people don't act on their own. People act together in community. So when we think about enabling autonomy, we have to think about how we enable communal structures, how we enable groups to act together so that they can functionally exercise their autonomy. And the same thing, privacy means privacy from a set of people. It doesn't mean complete isolation as an individual user. It means privacy within a group, privacy from a group. Trust is also contextual. One of the things that we've seen time and time again is that the kind of trust systems which engineers and cryptographers, even ones who are concerned about privacy, have tended to do things like enable transitive trust, right? This is great because it lets you scale your trust network faster. However, it turns out that humans are really, really bad at understanding the implications of transitive trust. So instead, in Briar, trust is not transitive. Trust does not extend beyond an individual relationship. Sure, you can introduce people, right? You can build bridges, but you have to actually build them. Bridges won't accidentally happen when you don't expect them, and you won't be caught out by the implications of a bridge that someone else built. And I mean, there are limits to our ability to stop that, of course. You may be caught out, but you will be caught out in the same way that you will be offline. Our goal is to model the way trust works offline instead of forcing users to understand a completely different way of looking at the world. The other thing which is very important to us is that you could trust different people with different things. You could trust different people with different aspects of your identity. You could trust different people with only a specific context, or say, I will let you see me in some contact mediums and not in others. You can be different people to other people, right? In the real world, we don't actually have monolithic identities. We are lots of different people to other people. Most of the systems that we use online don't provide for this. Centralized infrastructure, as we've said, is a weakness. So obviously everything that we built had to be built along these lines. But also, most devices aren't always online. When we're in major first world hubs, we forget because our phone never goes offline. Our laptop, sure, maybe it goes offline sometimes, but we can always just make a hotspot or whatever. Bandwidth is cheap, it's not a big deal. Most of the world doesn't work this way. A lot of devices spend a lot of time offline. Even phones, even in many urban areas, they fall offline all the time. And this happens even in the first world, and it annoys us. Sometimes, data gets cached, whatever, we forget about it. Apps sometimes pave over this, but they rarely do a very good job at it because this is not something that was designed in from the ground up. So this kind of offline first modality was super important for us as we started thinking about the constellation of capabilities that we wanted to provide our users with. Communication is also a small need compared to organization. And this, I think, is one of the really fundamental parts of what Briar is, but also what Bramble actually is, and why I consider Bramble a much more interesting component. So Briar as a tool is built in two layers. There's Bramble, which is the underlying wire protocol. A lot of the trust structures and basic communication framing, a lot of the security guarantees are built in at the Bramble layer. Briar is a messaging client that's built on top of that. Bramble allows you to take a block of information and send it to another user that you have a trust relationship with. Briar then takes that data transfer, that messaging message queuing system, and builds it into a conventional chat client. Now, the thing that this lets us say is, okay, we've got a chat client, that's one tool, but we also need a collaborative documentation editor, a wiki, something that can do like track changes and all of the other tools that we use, a spreadsheet, collaborative mapping tools, all of the other things that we use to build out an actual organization. Nobody runs, certainly not today, nobody runs entire organizations on a chat app. Maybe in the 90s, maybe in 92, when PGP was designed, it was like, well, we don't have collaborative applications really. There are some databases, but they're super specialized. Mostly what we have is email and local applications. So that made a lot of sense at the time, but we've gotten stuck in that mindset and we haven't really shifted away from it. So the point with Bramble is to build something out that, yes, Briar looks like a chat app, starts off from that background, but then lets us really build out to something that can have an entire community overlaid in it. The eventual goal is to build Bramble into something that's basically an application kit, something that allows users to create new applications from structured sets of components that can interact with Bramble and build out new applications and customize them fairly easily. Part of the autonomy is, for larger communities, being able to change the structure of their community. And by structure, I mean in the digital sense, right? The tools that they use to interact with each other determine the form of their community. And if you can't have autonomy over the form of your community, you don't have true autonomy. You have very strong limits on how you can interact. For instance, a community might want, say, tooling around liquid democracy, right? Tooling around some kind of collective voting system. However, different organizations are going to have very different demands there. And it's important that they get to actually determine these things themselves. Obviously, some of this stuff ideally should be provided, with as much flexibility for organizations to take up to reduce the barrier to entry. But we can't do all of that, and we shouldn't try to do all of that. Rather, we should give people these tools directly and allow them to actually make changes themselves when they need to. That, in combination with full decentralization that lets people act independently, and the rest of the associated principles around privacy, unlinkability, confidentiality, etc., is a vision for not a new internet. It's not an internet. It's not internetworked. But it is a vision for a new way of collaborating and using tools offline. I happen to really like the Briar and Bramble stack, and I'd love to see them go far, but what I care about much more are the ideas behind them. And whatever protocol wins, if we get something that is decentralized, secure, offline first, and thinks about the world in communities, that's what victory looks like for this project. Thank you very much.